So before I get started, I want to acknowledge that if I mispronounce any of these European names, I apologize in advance. I am definitely trying my best, but some of them I might struggle with, so if I mispronounce them, let me apologize beforehand. So it was July 16th, 1978, when the Belgian cycling ace Micheal Pollentier was fresh off the high of winning the Giro d'Italia the year previous in 1977. Now he was pedaling his way 150 miles to the foothills of Alp D Huez in its famous 21 hairpins. This is where he would launch what would become the famous attack against the two Tour de France favorites, Bernard Hinault and Joop Zoetemelk. Ultimately, this attack would prove successful, and he managed to not only win on the most famous stage in the Tour de France, but better yet, he was gifted the leader's yellow jersey because he was now in the lead in the overall general classification. As you can imagine, for a professional cyclist, this is pretty much an absolute dream come true. Alp D Huez is the biggest, most illustrious sort of coliseum in the sport of cycling. Tens of thousands of fans are on the mountain cheering your name. You were literally going through a sea of people. To win on that stage in particular is a career-making experience, but even better yet, to be the first rider to actually take the lead on that stage is sort of fairy tale level excitement, and I can only imagine the level of exuberance that Micheal was experiencing after that stage. There was, however, a small problem. As is customary after a podium finish at any of the stages at the Tour de France, the individuals would have to provide the obligatory urine sample. This was going to be a bit of an issue for Micheal because he was using what was at the time and still is a banned substance called Alpe that he was using to aid in his performance, specifically improve his breathing. Fortunately, though, the word was out that the testers at that year's Tour de France were not adhering to the strict protocol, and assumption that the riders were to disrobe completely before offering the test and were instead providing them a bit of leeway and allowing them to give them their sample fully clothed. This led to the obvious decision for Micheal to take matters into his own hands, not risk delivering a positive test, and decided to sort of craft a DIY urine bypass kit combining a tube, a balloon, or some other people suggested a condom, a long rubber hose, some tape, and as you can imagine, fixing it to his grubworm, so to speak. This was the plan. He walked into the drug tester station. This was about 15 or so minutes after the stage. He was assuming that he was going to be allowed to provide the sample without issue, allowing him to use the urine in the balloon under his armpit, therefore passing the test, ultimately keeping the jersey in the lead, and no one's the wiser. Now, unfortunately for Micheal, that exact day, there was two new recruits that were responsible for handling the drug testing protocol. And that was Dr. Alain Calvez and Renato Ciccone from the International Cycling Federation and the French Cycling Federation. Now, unaware to Micheal, these two individuals had actually caught previous riders attempting to bypass the test via the method that Micheal himself was going to attempt to use. And so instead of providing the riders the latitude to keep their clothes on, they were strict in mandating that the riders were to disrobe completely. As you can imagine, after finding the urine-filled balloon, the tube, and ultimately the tube attached to his private area, the two individuals required him to provide a genuine sample. Now, unfortunately for Micheal, the stress of this situation and the likely assumption that he is going to test hot resulted in him taking about 2 or so hours to provide a urine sample, enough time for the journalists and everybody at the tour to get pretty suspicious and to start questioning what was going on. Now, to Micheal's relief, it seemed like they were not necessarily going to punish him. They were going to allow him to provide the sample to determine whether or not he would test hot, because there is always a possibility that even if you have something in your system, it will not show up in a test. So for Micheal, he was hoping that it would come up negative and he would be free and clear, winning the stage and taking the leader's jersey. Now, when he left the testing booth, he, as you can imagine, was inundated with reporters and fans asking him what had happened, where he did what any good athlete does, and that is deny, 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 and deny some more, ultimately suggesting that nothing was out of the ordinary. It took a little bit longer than was expected, but everything was above board and he is the rightful winner. Well, he goes back to the hotel room to celebrate with his teammate, where he starts to hear rumblings that the assumption that they were going to let him slide on it was in fact not the case. While the test had in fact and ironically not come up positive, the UCI had decided to make an example out of Micheal and actually ban him from the Tour de France that year. This came as a total surprise because up to this point, the punishments for any doping violations were very lax. They were typically a time penalty or a relatively small fine. And as you can imagine, that really did not work very well to deter people from either doping or trying to cheat on the doping test after the stage. Well, as you can imagine, when Micheal got the news that this incredible fairy tale story of him winning Alp D Huez and taking the leader's jersey was going to be pulled out from underneath him. While he would still be technically the winner of Alp D Huez, he was not going to be in the leader's jersey because he was in fact not even going to be allowed to start the following day's stage. He was disqualified from the Tour de France. At that time, that was a almost unprecedented level of punishment because, as I had already mentioned, the punishments were typically very lax, either a time penalty or a relatively small fine, and Micheal was furious. Imagine going from the absolute high and euphoria of leading the biggest race in the world. You were at the high watermark of your career to now being told that not only are you not leading the Tour de France, you will not even be able to participate in what would eventually become the most controversial thing of his career. And ultimately, what many people still know him for is that famous attempted drug test scandal on Alpe d'Huez in 1978. Now, he would continue to deny it, even going so far in his frustration to suggest that this was a conspiracy on behalf of the other teams and the Tour de France to reward Bernard the leader's jersey, and he was the unfortunate victim of this conspiracy and manipulation. Now, obviously, this is not the case because him and his team were well known, as was pretty much the entire peloton, for doping using numerous substances, but in the moment, in that sort of frustration and anger, he was lashing out, even suggesting that not only would he never come back to the Tour de France, but no other Belgian rider would. Now, ultimately, that did not prove accurate. Obviously, the other riders did not leave the Tour de France, and Belgians have and continue to race the Tour de France in spite of his threat. But it's easy to appreciate the level of frustration and anger and just heartbreak when you realize that the dream you have been fighting your entire life for is over. And while, yes, he was doping, the reality is at that time, everybody was. The Tour de France was even gnarlier than it is now. I'm going to do a video about it, but you will realize why the essential, what many people regarded as a fundamental requirement to sort of take the potions, was a just way of life for racers at that time. But unfortunately for Micheal Pollentier from Belgium, this was a very difficult controversy to escape from. Now, he did end up winning the Tour of Flanders, which is one of the biggest spring classics in 1980, but that was his biggest and most noteworthy win after the controversy. Unfortunately for Micheal, he would always be pretty well known and connected with the infamous event on Alpe d'Huez in 1978, and hey, he still had a very successful career. Everybody doped, so he was certainly not the only rider, but this was one of the more notable and certainly more sort of outrageous examples of sort of getting caught, and especially getting caught red-handed. Anyway, leave me a comment and hope you enjoyed the video.